Number 7, evaluate 8 to the negative 2 power. Alright? Well, we need to find out what a negative exponent is. I want to give you a little discussion on that. So let's just suppose we had 5 times 5 times 5 times 5 times 1. That would be 5 to what power? Well, if you look here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so it's 5 to the 4 power. Okay? If you had 5 times 5 times 5 times 1, then you'd only have 3 5s here, wouldn't you? So it'd be 5 to the 3rd power. So if you had 5 times 5 times 1, you'd have 5 to what power? If you just had 5 times 5 times 1, it'd be 5 to what power? It'd be 5 squared, wouldn't it? Okay? And if you had 5 times 1, if you only had 5 times 1, you'd have 5 to the 1st power. Now, what number do we always use here? 1. If you had the number 1 with no 5s at all, a 1 with no 5s at all, how many 5s would you have then? You say you wouldn't have any. What number would be none? So if you had 1 with no 5s at all, you would have 5 to the 0 power, because you don't have any 5s over here. Now if you had 6s here, 6, 6, 6, 6 times 1 would be 6 to the 4th, and 6, 6, 6 would be 6 cubed, and 6 times 6 times 1 would be 6 squared, and 6 times 1 would be 6 to the 1st power. But if you didn't have any 6s here, then this would also equal 6 to the 0, or 7 to the 0, or 8 to the 0, or anything to the 0 power is going to be 1 with, okay? Alright? Now, let's look back at here. We understand that 5 to the 0, or x to the 0, or 7 to the 0, or 100 to the 0 equals 1. We understand that. Okay, but I still haven't told you about the negative exponents. Well, here we had a plus 4, a plus 3, a plus 2, a plus 1, and we had a 0. What would happen if we had a negative exponent? Well, can we look at the positive exponent first? This is a positive 4. And what operation is this over here? Okay. Positive 4 means what then? What operation is this? This is multiplication, isn't it? So if you have a plus here, then you're multiplying over here. So we would say, with a multiplication here, that plus means what? Multiply. Okay? Now I know some of you thought that plus meant to add, but we're talking about exponents here. When you have a positive exponent, we are multiplying over here, aren't we? Okay? Now, if positive means to multiply, if a positive exponent means we're multiplying, what would a negative exponent mean? If positive means to multiply, the opposite of multiplication is what? So now you're saying that minus must mean divide. Okay? Because if plus means to multiply and minus is the opposite of that, then we're going to be dividing here. Now you always thought plus minus meant subtraction. And it does, unless we're dealing with exponents. When we're dealing with exponents, minus must mean to divide. So now you're getting an idea what this minus sign means. Okay? Minus means to divide. So if I had 5 to the minus 1 power, what number did we always use? We always use 1. And this means, the minus means to divide. And how many 5s will we be dividing by? We'll have 1 5. So we'll end up with our number 1, which we use on all of these. Even if it's 5 to the 0, we have a 1. Okay? Alright? So you have 1 divided by 5, because this means to divide. Okay? Alright? Now, when you divide fractions, what do? When you divide a fraction, what do you do with the second fraction? You turn it upside down, don't you? So you call that a reciprocal, don't you? So when you divide, you use the reciprocal. What's the reciprocal of 5? It's 1/5. So minus means to divide, which means take the number 1 and divide it by 5, 1 5, or we could think of this as the reciprocal of 5 is 1/5. There's two ways to look at that problem. Okay? Now there's a third way to look at this thing. If we have a minus on the bottom, okay, well, let's look at this. Right here, the 5 was on top. This is really 5 over 1. And when you use the reciprocal of 5, the 5 scoots down to the bottom and changes into a plus 1. So you could call this a shifting game here. This 5 was on the top, it shifted down to the bottom and make a plus 1. Now, if we did that, we could think of this as using what is the reciprocal of 1/5. Since we're saying this means to divide, we use the reciprocal of 1/5, which would be 5 over 1, right? Okay? Or we can think of it shifting, this shifted down to the bottom as a plus 1. This could shift where? It's already in the bottom. If you're saying minus on the bottom, this could shift where? Up to the top as a plus 2. Okay? So you're thinking of this as a shifting game here. You shift this up to the top. It was on the bottom. Now you could think of having an imaginary 1 down here, or having a 1 down here, but this shifted up to the top, change the sign. Now, let's look at our original equation over here. Evaluate this. We're going to evaluate this. We're going to use the reciprocal of 8, which is what? 1 over 8. You could think of this as division. This is a division sign, which means take your 1 and divide it by 8 and do that 2 times. Or the preferred way, the best way I like to think of it, shift this down to the bottom and make a plus 2 on the bottom. When you have 8 squared, you get 64.